All right, so at the end of Esther chapter 6, we get to the last verse, and it talks about how Haman is talking with his family about the distress he's just felt, the where he's been insulted, and the shame he's feeling now because of having to cart Mordecai around on a horse and proclaim, "This is the man whom the king delights to honor." As he's telling his family about this, his head is covered, he's sad. All of a sudden, the king's guard comes and tells him that it's time for the banquet that Esther had invited him and the king to. So in Esther chapter 7 is the beginning of the banquet, and so there's all the pleasantries of the banquet. There's the food, there's the drink, there's all this stuff going on, all the music and things. And the Bible says on the second day, the king looks at Esther and says, "Okay, so what's your request?" And even says, "Up to half the kingdom I will give you." So in other words, she means something to him, and he's trying to prove that to her, saying, "You can have half the kingdom if you want." But anyways, he says this to her and says, "Up to half the kingdom," and she just and she responds with, "Well, my people are being destroyed. My life is going to be taken because of one of the men that made this commandment." And the king says, "Who would do such a thing as to make this request for the queen's life?" And she says, "This wicked man is Haman." Could you imagine, again, being in the room when Haman finds out, he hears his name come out of the queen's mouth? And so obviously the king loves the queen because he's just said, "I'll give you half the kingdom." The queen says, "The man who's trying to take my life and the life of my people is this wicked Haman who is sitting beside you." So the king, in all of his rage, stands up and walks out into the garden. In that day and age, when they used to eat, you'll see pictures of it sometimes in history classes. They used to lay on one side when they would eat, and it's old things for digestion and all that different stuff. But anyways, they would lay on one side to eat. Well, when the king gets up and leaves, Haman knows now he's begging for his life. So he goes to the queen and he starts to beg for his life. Well, when you think about begging for your life, you think about, you get down on your knees and you're begging, begging. Well, remember, she's laying down on her side, and Haman gets down and he's begging. And it talks about that when the king comes back in from the courtyard, when his wrath was kind of like passed by a little bit, he comes back in and sees Haman lying on the bed with his wife. That's not the idea of it. He was forcing her into the bedroom. The idea is he was on the couch with her that she was eating on, and he had fallen on her to beg for his life. But when the king comes in, it looks like he's trying to do something other than, beg for his life. So his anger is back up, and as soon as the king sees it, it's like the guards know what to do, and they put this thing over Haman's head, and they cover his head, and then he's trying to figure out what to do to Haman, and one of the servants says, "Well, wait a minute. Haman has a gallows 75 feet tall. Like, how would the king not even know that? You look out your window and you're like, gallows, it's got to be there." But he says he has the gallows 75 feet tall. Maybe you should hang him on that. The king says, "Let it be done." Whew. Haman is hanged at the end of chapter 7. So we've done away with Haman, but we still have the issue of how do we solve this problem of the people going after the children of Israel, after the Jews, on the day that Haman had the king sign it. Because remember, it can't be taken out once the king has signed it into law. And so we'll find out what the equation is going to be, what the problem, the solution that we're going to the problem is going to be tomorrow.